Hello and welcome to this panel discussion looking at the future of API production in China, broadcast as part of Virtual Expo Connect, hosted by CPHI and Kemeix China. Moderating the panel today will be Annie Xu, Principal Consultant at Informa Pharma Intelligence. Dr. Xu is an Associate Professor at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, a visiting scientist at the National Cancer Institute, and a Research Assistant Professor at the State Key Laboratory of the University of Hong Kong. She has led and participated in several drug R&D projects sponsored by the Ministry of Science and Technology of the People's Republic of China, the National Natural Science Foundation of China, various multinational pharmaceutical companies, and Chinese biotech companies. And now I'll hand over to Annie to introduce her panel.
Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm sure everyone is waiting for this panel discussion. So without further ado, may I invite the panel speakers to introduce about themselves and the company and your business in China and API industry. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Aurelio Arias. I am an engagement manager in the European Thought Leadership at IQVIA. In the European Thought Leadership Group, we tend to look at current hot topics and try and get evidence-based insights as to supporting or driving the narrative. IQVIA is very much involved in the API business, not only from supplying data, but also from supporting in other services. And China we see as a partner now and going forwards in the future. So we very much have a large presence in the country and will hope to continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, André Rieks. I've been working as an interim manager for biopharma for over 25 years and support global players in technology transfer and quality, including outsourcing projects to Asia and more recently the other way around. Since 2016, I've been part of the Kemeix team as head of quality and responsible person. Kemeix is the world's first GDP certified trading, procurement, and information platform for APIs, as well as for food and feed additives such as vitamins. And our platform analyzes transaction data and provides deep insight into price and demand and supply developments for API. And the most important APIs traded through Kemeix include antibiotics and classic active ingredients such as paracetamol or ibuprofen, the majority of which are produced in China today. So this is where the insight comes from. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marieke van Dalen. I'm working for Aspen in the Netherlands, which is an API producing site. We have business, of course, with China because as many other API producers in Europe, we source many of our intermediates or starting materials in China. But we also sell some APIs in China as there has been some requests for APIs from outside of China to be entered onto the Chinese market. I'm also a board member of EPIC. EPIC is the European Industry Organization for API Producers. And as such, I am frequently speaking at conferences, etc., on API-related topics. I've been working in the API-related industry regulatory-wise for over 30 years.
Thank you. So this section will be separated into 3 parts. The first part, we will talk about the past, and then present, and the future. So let's start with the past. Based on our analysis or the report from the China Chamber of Commerce for import and export of medicine and health products, API production and export by China reached over 10 million tons in 2019, and most of them were exported to Europe. So based on your experience, what kind of API were exported from China, and what is the structural reasons for outsourcing the API production to China? Could you mind to comment?
I can begin if you'd like.
Thank you.
Now, I think from my experience and speaking to people in the industry, not only from the API side, but also from the distribution side, China's really grown in terms of being a major global supplier, if not the top, especially for certain classes over the last decade. And not least over the last 5 years, we've seen the activity of API and intermediates and raw chemicals coming from China balloon. So I think predominantly, as with other industries, the structural reason for this shift towards manufacturing China is really an economic one. Low labor prices, low labor cost drives a lot of this alongside subsidized exports, etc., around the world. So we've seen it grow, and I think what we might be seeing in future, I'll leave that to the next section, is maybe a shift in the type of APIs in China. But definitely over the last 5 years, it has grown in volume.
Thank you.
Yeah, André here. May I add with regards to the numbers that in various publications from Business and Politics, figures in the range of 60 to 80% are circulating with regards to the sourcing of the APIs. And however, the real figures on the share of API originating in China are very difficult to collect and vary by product category. And one of the main reasons for this are, for example, intermediary distributors, because of whom the actual origin of the finished product is not obvious. And we must not forget that for the majority of APIs, the few producers of critical intermediates and starting materials are also located in China. And such upstream supply chain is even more opaque. And moreover, statistical trade data shows flaws in the analysis of raw material trade flows. As according to Eurostat, the Statistics Bureau of the European Union, Switzerland exports twice the volume of antibiotics to Europe compared to China. Although most of the raw materials come from China, the very fact that we actually do not know exactly how high the rate of API imports from China actually is therefore the $1 million question, I would say.
Thank you.
I think I completely agree with that, because yes, we see that there are very high volumes coming in from China. I think Mr. Trump also had some comments on that when he found out that most of the antibiotics in the US were coming from China. And as we know, in the US, it's even more prescribed than in Europe. So the figures, yes, the 60 to 80%. I think it's not just China, it's the combination of China and India there for these figures. But they are high and they are becoming higher, I think. And a lot of that has to do with the pricing system, I guess, in Europe. Because if you need to have your prices as low as possible as a drug product manufacturer, you will look for the, of course, less costly solutions. So one of those is to get your APIs from China.
Thank you. So let's talk about the sourcing. I think it depends on which types of API are we talking about. The blended drugs or generics, or chemicals or biologics. So based on your experience, it's single sourcing, dual sourcing, or strategic diversification sourcing are more common in this sector. Could you might comment about this?
Yeah, may I just quickly comment that manufacturers of manufacturers of finished products usually pursue a dual source strategy in order to keep the cost for qualification and approval as low as possible, while at the same time protecting themselves against the shortage of API. And in industries like veterinary, food, or feed additives, which are also quite regulated, it's easier and cheaper to add additional sources. You must keep in mind that a new registration for a new API source can easily accrue total costs of 500,000 or even more due to high quality standards and regulatory burdens.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it's correct. What you will see is that most drug product manufacturers will have either one or two sources in their files, not more, because of course having a second manufacturer in your file as a second supplier means that you will also have to do change control for both, even though one of them will not be actually supplying to your company at that time, which also brings high costs. So that is something that needs to be studied very carefully by the drug product manufacturer, whether it's worthwhile to have a second supplier in the file. And obviously, companies are not so very happy to be a second supplier in the file because they have to keep their companies. They're not really customers, but on paper they are their customers. They have to keep them informed. They have to file changes on behalf of them, etc. So there is always some discussion there. And what you will very often see is that you will have two actual active sources is not very common. Very often it's one real source and one is really a backup source to prevent the high costs of changing over in case of an emergency.
Thank you.
Sorry, I expect you want me to comment on this. You know, I don't think I have much to add. From my side, you know, politically, we are trying to encourage companies to diversify their sourcing, introduce more channels, etc. It's not just a simple case, as André and Marieke have already elucidated. It's very much goes down to, is it economically viable? So for any sort of push in that multi-source direction, you are going to need the payers to back that up, because at the end of the day, it's going to bring the pricing up. So if we're okay with that, then yes, I think we're probably okay to start multi-sourcing, but it's not such a simple answer, as you can see.
Thank you. Thank you. So the last question about the past section is, what is the major challenge and opportunity for global sourcing in general?
Well,
I can.
May I just start just giving one quick comment, because for me as a QP responsible for the release of API, I can just state that two essential aspects are in focus as a challenge. It's quality and reliability. And unfortunately, those two factors are exactly what shapes the import of API to Europe. Time and again, unforeseeable bottlenecks are quality defects, which demand a high degree of flexibility from many manufacturers of finished pharmaceuticals. So, however, due to the enormous cost pressure in the pharmaceutical industry, the opportunities associated with sourcing in China continue to outweigh the cost.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think, you know, especially we're talking about the past, the major challenges that the industry has seen over the last sort of 5 years has been this drive towards lower cost. And the US is the biggest buyer. They have, they control about 90% of purchasing in terms of volume via 3 main distributors. And so this gives them a large buying power, which is great for patients who want low price medicines, but not so great for ensuring that you have the consistent level of quality and supply, as André mentioned. So I think that's one challenge that has been emerging very slowly. You know, that's predominantly US driven factor. But of course, we can't deny that recently with the pandemic, that's proven a major disruption to what could affect distribution lines throughout the world. But that also represents opportunities. So a challenge potentially in that might be that you know, we want to make sure that levels of quality and supply are diversified and up to a good standard. But from a Chinese manufacturer's point of view, they might want to make sure that, you know, they are operating in different areas to ensure a good, consistent quality supply. for local players as well, so regional players, so Southeast Asia, they might also see that as an opportunity to enter some of the markets that have been taken away from China, etc. So I think I would echo that the opportunities largely outweigh the challenges.
Thank you.
But I think we can all agree also that some steps have been taken there, because in the past, what we saw was that the Chinese products were very cheap. And yes, they were subsidized for one part, but also because environmental issues, for instance, were not really high on the agenda in China. And I think what we've seen is that the authorities have stepped up there in the last few years. Many sites have been closed because of environmental issues. And I think that's really something that's a sign to the Western world that China is stepping up to try and adhere to the same kind of requirements that are there in the Western world. And what we are also looking for, of course, is the GMP standard. There is a GMP standard in China. It is in line with the ICH Q7. So that looks perfect on paper. However, there is still the situation that companies that are only producing for export are not getting mandatory inspections. They are not covered by the current system. So that is something that's still a lack. And the problem thereof is, of course, a consequence is that if you are not inspected by your own authorities and you do not have a quick and easy relationship with them, what do you do when you have a problem in your own site? If you have a problem in a manufacturing site in Europe or in the US, you go and contact your national health authorities and you can discuss with them what the best solution is. That's not possible for these specific companies that are only producing to export in China. And that is something I think we should also consider. And I think steps are being taken at the moment to get that also on a higher level. And that will certainly have a good impact, I guess, on the quality. And then quality is not just meeting specifications, but on the GMP status of the Chinese companies.
Thank you very much. So now let's move on to the present section. So what is happening now? So could you tell us more about the impact of the pandemic outbreak? Are there any changes in the situation that we mentioned above in 2020? And what kind of policy has been implemented to secure the supply of essential raw material? Could you share some cases with us? Thank you.
Well, as André here, as already mentioned, changing the suppliers for APIs is not so easy, and moreover, the pandemic has initially only a short-term impact on the availability of basic active ingredients due to inventories on all levels of the chain. And already in January, Kemeix conducted a famous survey among procurement professionals where 85% foresaw supply chain disruptions only in the second quarter. And the truth is that the majority of unavailable APIs were short before COVID already for various reasons. And currently, the largest impact of COVID can be observed in the transport sector, as manufacturing in China works almost without friction. Kemeix, for example, we always track the freight rates in the transaction running on our platform. And here we see an increase of up to 200% in the price of air transportation, with a simultaneous decrease of up to 80% in loading capacities. And the reason is the enormous decline in passenger aircraft transportations. And for sea freight, similar trends can be observed, which is mainly due to the prioritization of transport of, for example, masks or protective equipment. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo those comments again. The immediate disruption was largely mitigated by actually a very impressive actions from both the Indian and the Chinese government to continue to keep manufacturing alive. However, that doesn't take away from the political noise that has remained around making sure that maybe bring manufacturing back to local shores. So there is that disruption that's definitely going to be shaping the next few years. In terms of the logistical side of it, André already mentioned the air freight, and not only is air the quick way of getting medicines to a country, but it's also the way that many low volume medicines actually are transported. So when you have really high potent APIs, they typically only are very small in the actual mass amount. And if they are transported by air, then you can imagine that the cost of these predominantly are driven by the rates of air freight. So that has increased. I think it's led a lot of governments to be a little bit worried about it.
Thank you.
I think what we've seen in Europe very much is that in March, there was really a crisis in the eyes of the EMA and in the eyes of the European Commission. So weekly telecons were started with both EMA, the European Medicines Agency, European Commission and industry representatives present, weekly telecons to see if there was anything the Commission could do to avoid shortages, because at that time they thought there would be shortages within 2-3 weeks, even for critical COVID-19 medicines. So medicines that were used, maybe not directly to treat COVID-19, but to be used in the intensive care units, for instance. In the end, they found that it was not, as you already said, André, it was not as alarming as it seemed, because there turned out to be quite a few places where there was still stock. It was also very clear, I think, that the European countries were not really one union. They were all working for their own benefit. My company is producing one of these ICU unit critical products. We have doubled our volume in the months after March. But we did get requests, even for instance, from hospitals who would like to make the drug product themselves because they could not get it on the market. So there were some alarming situations, but it was not as alarming as it seemed in the beginning for the Commission. What happened is that, for instance, in Europe, what they have done in the regulatory field is they made some regulatory flexibility. So where it's normally, as André already explained, very difficult to get a new API supplier into your dossier, it was now quite easy. You could get it in very easy so that there would not be a disruption of supply, and get in all the official data that are normally required at a later date. So that is something that Europe has done also as a prevention of getting real shortages in the market.
Yeah, and may I just add, because that
Yes.
fits to that, just a quick comment that with regards to the policies and the measures implemented, that in terms of in terms of medium-term measures, however, politicians reacted even faster than the economy and launched various subsidy programs to promote them. For example, the company Sandoz receives the subsidy of 50 million euros to ensure the production of antibiotics, and in France, a program for production of paracetamol and other APIs was recently launched for 200 million euros. And at the same time, as already mentioned, the pressure is being exerted by the drug authorities with no delivery capability, being subject to penalties even.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So how about the back sourcing production? Do you see any opportunity or challenge here?
Yeah, I can start.
Thank you.
Challenges and opportunities abound, I think. Let's start, I guess, with the challenges, and more from the political sphere, because, as André mentioned, the politicians were quick to jump on this case, not necessarily taking into account the complexity behind it, but where there's a will, there's a way. I think in terms of actual backshoring, there are many questions that need to be ironed out, such as, are we talking about the raw materials? Are we talking about the intermediates, or in fact the API, the finished active ingredient itself? All of which can contain multiple single source points, not only China, but in other areas around the world. So really, what is the essence of this backshoring activity? It's probably to make sure that we have this control over the manufacturing in Europe, control over manufacturing in the US. And I think some of these big challenges will need sufficient funding. I note André's points on, France making sure that paracetamol is being produced on French soil in the next few years, etc. But really, to get the sort of huge shift, we need a real, not only political but economic drive to bring a lot of these highly used classes of medicines, the pain, antibiotics, antihypertensives, etc., back towards Europe or the US. Now, opportunities, certain companies who are already invested in manufacturing in Europe, that is clearly opportunities for them. Granted, they need to make their case and have political support. We've seen in the US, for example, not necessarily the most competent company is awarded a huge grant to create or manufacture medicines in the US itself. Now, I think another challenge, and I'd like to understand maybe by the panelists' view on this, is what do we think about a drive towards non-profit manufacturing, as we see in the US, like the state of California, for example. We've also seen with Civica Rx that non-profit manufacturing might actually provide quite challenging for the largest buyer to start, essentially driving these the cost of these down to the cost of production. So that's I think an interesting challenge for me, and I wonder if there are any opportunities for the rest of the world in that.
Thank you very much.
Well, then I may have to add that without the support of the healthcare systems and their willingness to bear the price of ensuring supply, it will be very difficult, and startup financing and subsidies will not help. But however, backshoring also offers enormous opportunities. Given that traditional manufacturing processes that have been in place for many decades continue to predominate in China. But today there are many new production technologies that are clearly superior in terms of efficiency, economy, and ecology, and are predestinated for the development of a sustainable industry. For example, I have to mention that last week I was at the Technical University of Hamburg-Harburg, where in the group of Professor Liese, there was presented an industrially mature enzymatic process for the synthesis of proteins like naproxen with a yield of 99%, whereas classical chemical synthesis is at 50%. Or even better, we've shown reactor systems controlled by artificial intelligence and algorithms that optimizes processes virtually overnight and fully automatically, thus reducing development efforts by 90%. That was really fascinating, and this is definitely a big opportunity.
Thank you.
But also there, André, what you will see is that companies are hesitant to introduce these new kind of technologies, even though they know it exists and even though they're working on it, because of the enormous high regulatory costs. And to be clear, if you look in Europe at the system, the API manufacturer is not the one who pays the cost for any change in the process. It's the drug product manufacturer who has to bear the costs. So if we are the second supplier in their dossier, they certainly do not want to do that. So that is always a discussion. It's very much about money, I guess, but also about regulatory costs.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. This is why I mentioned the support of the healthcare systems. That is essentially for that.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you. How about the transfer activity in Europe. Could you comment about the changes in this during this process, this situation? Is it more technology transfer activities that's occurring right now?
Yeah. May I just comment that as a consultant for technology transfers, I cannot or may not give any names or numbers, but since the beginning of the pandemic, I have noticed a 10 times fold increase in the demand for technology transfer support. And that should speak for itself.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree. I think also companies are looking at these regulatory flexibility things that are going on and see this as an opportunity, as a good time to go forward and implement changes and new technologies because it's now easier than at any time before now. So that the pandemic has brought us, maybe that's the correct way to say it for regulatory people.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't comment specifically necessarily on individual tech transfer activities, but I would agree with Marieke there that now's a chance to maybe shake things up a little bit, to invest or look at new opportunities, because if you can get anything that for APIs either looks like it increases the diversity of your sources or improves quality, improves yield, cuts cost and or time, then that's going to be beneficial to managing some of the large healthcare bills that the pandemic has brought upon these European countries.
Thank you very much. So now let's move on to the third part of this section, which is about the future. Let's have the crystal ball in your hand. So could you tell us more about the future trend of the global API market? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, as already noted, the enormous cost pressure in the pharmaceutical industry will not lead to a rapid change in the relevance of China as the most important supplier of basic APIs. It is likely that the local support programs and activities will only ensure the availability of most important APIs in Europe, and the establishment and expansion of storage capacities in Europe is likely to become more relevant. But in principle, the impact of the pandemic will remain rather small, and this is what we are currently seeing at Kemeix for the global API market and its structures.
Thank you.
I think what we're also seeing. Oh, sorry,
you
go first. Oh, what we also see is that the Commission has, or the Parliament, in fact, has adopted a resolution just 2 weeks ago, 17th of September, 1 week ago, to enable the EU to be more self-sufficient when it comes to medicines. And I think they're trying to make some steps there, which is, of course, as already said, making money available. So having some money to at least get some of the production back into Europe. That's not being done here at all. But what they have also tried to do is to have a European pharmacy. That's one of the ideas that's described in their proposal. And I think it sounds very interesting. I'm not too sure yet if it will really be the solution, but that is something that could work, because what we saw now during the COVID crisis months, and maybe we will have some again in the future, I think we are already heading there. What we saw is that even within Europe, countries were closing down their borders for export because what they had in their country, they didn't want to go to another country because the pricing systems in Europe are not the same. So obviously, sellers would like to buy to the highest bidding country, which is not something you should have during a pandemic and which you should not have in a united Europe. So those are things that they're also looking for, and I think that sounds quite interesting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think we mustn't forget as well that Europe is a really big operator within API manufacturing. We have been talking about China and India. They do manufacture the bulk. The APIs that are manufactured in Europe and places like Switzerland, Spain, Italy, etc., tend to be more in the specialist nature, definitely are thought to be more on the innovative side as well, the originator API. So I think, that if we talk about trend of the global API market, I think, yes, from a macroeconomic standpoint, this pandemic is not going to make a big shift in the way China is such a large player and will continue to be so. Ditto that with India. But what we probably will see is a move towards different kind of therapeutic classes that are manufactured in China, potentially trying to add more value, go up the value chain. So it would be taking away or starting to encroach upon the APIs that are maybe more manufactured in places like Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, that the classes will start to move towards China. And I think that's probably just going to be manufacturers in China trying to differentiate themselves by moving up towards specialty type medicines. These are low volume, however, and so in the grand scheme of things, like I said, it's not going to really change the large picture. One of the points I think that André alluded to was a change in the warehousing capabilities around Europe, and I think that's going to be a real possibility. Is going to be really interesting because it's a lot cheaper to stockpile medicines for a 6 or 12-month period rather than actually have to spin up new manufacturing capacity within these countries. So I think we'll have probably a much slicker operation in terms of stockpiling to make sure that any future pandemics or hiccups, we don't all start rushing towards trying to get stockpiles at the very last minute, which lead to some of these problems like Marieke mentioned in terms of each country acting in their own interests rather than a united front. And it has poked holes in the European Union. I am sad to say, even as a Brit who's already had plenty of experience with disharmony between my country and the European Union.
Thank you very much. So how about the supplier management? What is the future trend of this supplier management? Would you mind to comment about this too?
Well, the key factor of supplier management will be digitalization. The transparency in terms of price, quality, reliability that comes with digitalization, as we already making possible through Kemeix, will have a significant impact on existing markets. And certainly companies are now reconsidering investments in inventories or additional suppliers as shortages in such special situations prove to come at high cost or lost sales, penalties, or brand damage.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the sheer volume of data at the moment that's being generated through purchases, through inventory management, etc., is just not being captured and used smartly. I think that's right. If we start to structure this information, if we are able to overlay clever algorithms, potentially artificial intelligence, to understand when you might need extra product and what price is acceptable to you, etc., it can start doing some smart decisions. Initially, I would assume advising on what you should get and at what price, but in future, potentially even doing a lot of the purchasing automatically for the high volume, sort of more, the mass market stuff, leaving more of the, the individual interaction amongst the high worth or the high value APIs.
Thank you.
I think I can only echo what has been said.
Thank you very much. So the last question for the future sector part is, if you have to name one emerging technology which is most needed in the future, which one would you choose? We have heard about the digitalization, green manufacturing, smart intelligence, etc. Which one would you choose?
Yeah, it's already mentioned the future of commerce will be largely shaped by digitalization, and increasing networking among players will contribute to ever greater transparency. So reliability and quality are likely to increase steadily. And new platform technologies, which like Kemeix are a kind of ERP system of global API trade, will be the driver for this. So moreover, as mentioned before, new manufacturing technologies are offering opportunities to manufacture profitably in the Western Hemisphere.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think artificial intelligence used wisely. Now, I don't like banding around that word too freely, but I think it's, you know, really about trying to reduce the manual burden on what is probably termed more about optimizing the supplier network, optimizing the manufacturing processes as well. So, for example, ensuring that we have preventative where we make sure, you know, we have the artificial intelligence actually tells us which of the manufacturing pieces in our plant actually need to have preventative maintenance rather than waiting for that piece to actually break down, etc. So I think all this will really drive optimization. What I would like to also talk about briefly, and I don't think we've discussed about, is the green technologies as well. I think there is a huge shift, not only in our industry, but everywhere else as well within our lives, towards more of a circular economy, a carbon-free economy. And, you know, this is where we've already had pledges from several companies, not least like AstraZeneca and Pfizer, to really bring down their carbon emissions. So for that to happen in a huge manufacturing industry, there will have to be, you know, step changes in the way we use these processes and optimize them towards bringing down the carbon footprint. I think that will probably drive a lot of the emerging technologies as well.
Thank you very much.
For me, there's one thing, I guess that's really going to be the future also for API production, continuous manufacturing, which means that you're using much smaller volumes of solvents, etc., which has an immediate impact on the sustainability. So I think that there's a big future there, but it's not yet very common. It's only now that ICH starts to think about making guidance there, because guidance in US, Europe, Japan, they're all different. They all have different views on that. So it's good to have one common view so that companies know where to go and what the regulations are. But I think there's a big future in that. So
thank you very much. Now come to the end of this panel discussion. Could you mind to give a concluding remark to our audience about the future of API productions?
Yeah, I can start. So I think in general, you know, I think what we've heard has been some really interesting developments. If you are an API manufacturer and you are thinking, you know, what do the next few years look like for me, then I would definitely start to focus on a few opportunities that some of these challenges that we've alluded to might be shaking out. So that might be in terms of looking at your data sources and understanding exactly how to capture them, how to modernize them. It might be looking at the way your processes are done within your plants, or indeed what portfolio of medicines you look to producing in the future. It really would be important for you as a manufacturer to make sure that you take heed of the political wind, because I think that's really going to be changing the industry essentially very in an almost insidious way, but very slowly. I think we'll start seeing a shift towards some manufacturing towards Europe, towards the US, and so there are definite opportunities there for everyone.
Thank you.
I agree. I think that the momentum is there to get some of the production back into Europe or the US, there where necessary. But of course, we have really thinking about a further future, not just COVID-19 related future, but going further along, it will still mean that China and India will have a big part of the pie. I think I'm quite sure about that. So I think you have to be very careful in what you want to bring back, what you do not want to bring back. I agree that we should not be completely reliable for some types of medicines for outside of Europe supply, because that is a danger. I think we've all seen that now. So companies should prepare, but also the authorities should prepare very well, and the Commission should be prepared.
Thank you.
Yeah, just my concluding remark would be that the topic of outsourcing and insourcing of manufacturing has become a very political and controversial one. First, we must ensure that politicians do not only make bold promises, but are creating a sustainable ecosystem for local manufacturing and investment. And second, we shall continue and strengthen our partnership with China and other important countries. And lastly, we must proactively use new technologies and digital tools to create supply chain transparency and reduce unnecessary costs. And more companies in Europe and China are already using online platforms like Kemeix, and the increasing transparency will be particularly important for manufacturers in China in terms of quality and reliable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of your insightful sharing. Unfortunately, due to time limit, this is the end of this section. And thank you very much for your attention too.
Thank you to all of our panel members for taking part today, and to our audience for your attention. We hope you enjoy the rest of Virtual Expo Connect.